Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Gavin Lon Digital. I'm Gavin Lon. This is the 9th part in a series of videos with the self-explanatory title of Let's Build an ASP.NET Core MVC web application on .NET 5. In the 7th part of this course, we created the admin menu and integrated our admin menu within the main menu bar. In the 8th part of this course, we created an area to partition our web application where code for functionality pertaining to the administration operations is separated from code implemented for non-administration functionality. So the admin area is where we are creating our code that implements functionality pertaining to our Crud operations, i.e. create, read, update, and delete operations for our main entities, i.e. the category, category item, content, media type, and user category entities. In the previous part of this course, we created the Crud operations for the category entity using a facility built into Visual Studio that we can use to scaffold Crud operation-related code for the relevant entities. So, in Part 8, we created default code for the Crud operations pertaining to the category entity using scaffolding. In this video, we are going to scaffold the Crud operations for the category item entity. So, right out of the box, after we scaffolded the code for the category entity, we were able to create a new category in our database through our web application. We could read the data from an existing category stored within our database, we could update an existing category stored within our database, and we could delete an existing category from our database. In this video, we are going to scaffold the Crud operation code for the category item entity, but unlike for the category entity, we will need to modify the scaffolded code in order to meet certain requirements. Before we get going with this, I'd like to address a few comments that I've received recently. 2 subscribers have asked me if I can get these videos out quicker. My answer to this question is that I would love to be able to get the content out a lot quicker, but these videos do take a lot of time and resources to produce. Having said that, I do understand how you feel, and I will certainly work toward creating these videos a lot quicker. But it is important to me that the quality of these videos are not compromised. Another subscriber asked me how he can thank me for these videos through a tipping facility. The answer to this question is that I have included a PayPal link in the description of these videos for those of you who want to help support the channel through donations. Any amount is greatly appreciated, as it will help me cover costs and ultimately allow me to spend more time creating content for you. You can of course support the channel through subscribing, and please also ring the bell to be notified of future content. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, it will be greatly appreciated. I will of course need this channel to grow if I am to continue delivering high quality content to you moving forward. I would like to thank those who have supported the channel, which has now been running for over 2 years. And a special thanks to those who have written such kind comments about the videos. I really appreciate it. The last comment I wish to address is that I've been asked if the videos that have been produced for this channel can make a learner company ready. My answer to this question is that there is certainly enough information provided on the C# side. I would say though, if you are looking to become a C# web developer, it is important to also have JavaScript skills as well as HTML skills. I would say that it is also important for a developer to have at least basic Transact SQL skills. I do intend to cover these technologies on this channel in the future. I also believe that it is very important for the learner to practice regularly in order to become proficient using the relevant technologies. For those learners who don't yet have any experience working as a developer and wish to gain employment as a developer, I would advise that you create your own applications and make your code available through, for example, GitHub repositories, where a potential employer can see the practical skills that you can bring to the relevant company. I intend to create content on how you can do this in the future. Right, so let's get into the content for this video. The first thing I want to do is add 2 properties to the category item entity. So if we look at the database design document, which can be found on GitHub, a link to the relevant GitHub repository has been included below in the description, we can see that a description field was included in the table representing the category item entity. But the description property was not included in the category item class here. So this means that currently we do not have a description field in the category item table within our database. So let's include the description property as per the database design specification. So to do this, we can simply add the description property to the category item class, then create a new migration and then commit the migration to the database. So let's add the description property to the CategoryItem class. I also want to add another property to the CategoryItem entity. You'll see the significance of the property we are about to add a bit later in the tutorial. Let's add a public virtual property that is of the generic iCollection type. Let's strongly type the iCollection generic type with the select list item type, like this. We'll deal with the red squiggly line in a bit. Let's name this property MediaTypes. I'll explain why this property contains the virtual keyword in its definition in a later tutorial. So the reason we want to store a collection of objects of type select list item in our CategoryItem entity is because we want to render a drop-down list to the administrator so that when the administrator adds a new category item, the administrator can select the relevant media type appropriate to the content associated with the relevant category item. So at the moment, this media types drop-down list will contain two items, namely article and video. So you'll see a bit later in this tutorial why this collection is strongly typed with the select list item type. For now, let's bring in the appropriate namespace where the select list item type resides. So we want Entity Framework Core to create a field within our database based on this new description property. We don't, however, want the media types property to affect the migration we'll create to do this. So we can force Entity Framework Core to ignore the media types property by declaring an attribute named NotMapped against the media types property, like this. Let's bring in the appropriate namespace where the NotMapped attribute resides. So let's bring in the system.componentModel.dataAnnotations.schema namespace. Great. Okay, so let's create our migration through the Package Manager console window. So let's run the add-migration command. And let's name our migration add_description_to_category_item_table. Let's press the Enter key to run our command. And you can see in the code for our new migration that the up method contains code to add the description field to the category item database table. The down method contains code that will remove the description field from the category item database table. So when we run the update-database command, the up method will run. If we were to roll back the effects of this migration, the down method would be run. Okay, let's run the latest migration against the database by running the update-database command. Great! Let's confirm that our new field has been created in our database. And there it is. Great. So now we are ready to create the CRUD operation related code for our category item entity. Let's scaffold the code for the CRUD operations pertaining to the category item entity. So to do this, right-click the controllers folder in the admin area, select Add, and then New Scaffolded Item. Within the dialog box, select the category item entity from the drop-down list provided for the model class field. In the drop-down list provided for the data context class field, select the list item with the text application DB context. Then let's modify the controller name field. Let's change the relevant text from category items to category item. We can leave the other fields at their default values. Let's press the Add button. Great, so this scaffolding operation has created a new folder named CategoryItem in the Views folder in the admin area. This CategoryItem folder corresponds to a new file created in the Controllers folder named CategoryItemController.cs. This, of course, has been created in the admin area. So let's look at the CategoryItem folder that has been created in the relevant Views folder. We have a Razor view named Index, which contains code to render a list of category items. We have a Create Razor view that has been created to provide a front-end facility for an administrator to create a new category item in the system. We have a Delete Razor view that provides a front-end facility for an administrator to delete an existing category item from the system. We have a Details Razor view that has been created to display the details of a particular category item to an administrator. We have an Edit Razor view that has been created to provide a front-end facility for an administrator to edit an existing category item. Then if we look at the controller class that was generated by the scaffolding operation we have just performed, named CategoryItemController, we can see that the appropriate action methods have been automatically created for us within the CategoryItemController class. It is important to note that a parameter of type ApplicationDBContext is included within the definition for the constructor of the CategoryItemController class. The reason why this is important is because it highlights how dependency injection is built into the ASP.NET Core MVC framework. So the relevant configuration code within the startup.cs class means that the database context object can be automatically passed into the constructors of our controller classes. This means we can easily use the database context object passed into the relevant constructor to perform CRUD-related operations against our database within the relevant controller classes. These CRUD operations can be performed through a combination of the Entity Framework core technology and LINQ. We'll discuss dependency injection further in another tutorial. Let's briefly look at the action methods that have been automatically generated for us through our scaffolding operation. These action methods correspond to the Razor views created in the category item folder that resides within the Views folder in the admin area. Right, so please follow along with these steps I'm about to perform to modify the code that we have just scaffolded pertaining to the category item entity. Even if you don't fully understand the code to begin with, this code will all make sense to you as we progress with the development of this web application. So firstly, let's understand how we are going to implement the relationship between the category entity and the category item entity on the front end. We want an administrator to be able to click a link on the index view relevant to the category entity in order to navigate to the index view of the category item entity, where the category items related to the relevant category will be displayed. So for example, let's say we have a category with the title C# for Beginners already saved to the system. The category items that are related to the C# for Beginners category could be, for example, Introduction to C#, C# data types, C# variables, etc. So when a link denoting the C# for Beginners category is clicked by an administrator on the index view pertaining to the category entity, we want the administrator to be navigated to the index view pertaining to the category item entity. And we want all the relevant category items related to the C# for Beginners category displayed on the relevant view. Please see parts 1 and parts 3 of this video series to gain an understanding of the one-to-many relationship between the category entity and the category item entity. So let's look at the category item controller class. We need to modify the index action method here. So at the moment, this link query is going to return all category items currently saved to the system, which means, for example, if we had two categories saved to the system, for example, C# for beginners and advanced C#, this code would bring back category items for both categories. We need to filter the data that will be returned by the link query using an appropriate category ID value. So, for example, if the user clicks a link pertaining to the C# for beginners category, we only want the category items related to the C# for beginners category displayed to the administrator. So let's create a link query that queries the category item entity. And let's include a where operator in our link query to filter the results by category ID. So this begs the question, from where do we get the category ID value? The answer is that this value will be passed into the index action method. We have the luxury of using the MVC framework as the foundation for our web application, so the .NET runtime will handle passing in the category ID value for us. All we need to do is add the category ID parameter in our index action method like this. From a user's perspective, a link labeled update items will be available next to an item denoting a category, which will be present on the index view for the category entity. The update items link will contain an appropriate attribute that will be set to the relevant category ID value. When the administrator clicks the update items link, the relevant category ID value will be passed to the index view as an argument. We have told the MVC framework, as it were, by including the category ID parameter in the definition for the index action method to pass the category ID argument to the index action method in our category item controller class. Great! For more detail on link queries, please view a video series created by this channel on the link technology. As always, all links mentioned in these videos can be found in the relevant descriptions of the videos. You'll notice that we are using async await and task functionality for these action methods. For detailed information on asynchronous programming using C#, please see a video series created by this channel on this topic. A link to this video series can be accessed below in the description. So then let's pass the results returned from our link query, which will contain a list of objects of type category item, to the view method here. This view method will pass the relevant model data to the index view. So basically, the MVC framework can then generate the relevant HTML code based on the relevant model data being appropriately manipulated by the code within the relevant Razor view. The HTML code returned from this process can then be returned to the client and rendered within the client's browser. So the next step is to create a link to the category item index view from the category entities index view. So let's go to the index view for the category entity and add an anchor element. Let's copy and paste the delete anchor element here. And then change the code appropriately for this anchor element, which will become the update items link. This anchor element will appear as a link labeled update items to the administrator So let's include the appropriate text here between the opening and closing anchor tags. So we want this anchor element to navigate the administrator to the category item controller. So let's include the ASP-controller attribute in our anchor element and set its value to category item. So in order to pass the category ID value through to the index action method of the category item controller, we can include an attribute where the relevant attribute's name contains the ASP-root prefix followed by a dash and then the name of the parameter, i.e. in this case, category ID. So let's set this attribute to the appropriate category ID value. We want this link to navigate the administrator to the index view. This is done through the index action method contained within the category item controller. So let's change the value that the ASP-action attribute is currently set to, i.e. from delete to index. So if we go back to the ASP-root-category item attribute, notice how we proceed the code item.id with an @ symbol. This is one of the ways that we are able to include C# code within a Razor view. In this code here, the code is looping through a list of categories currently saved to the system. Each item object in the for each loop represents a category. So an item object ID value, which contains the relevant category item's ID value, will be sent through to the index action method contained in the category item controller class when the relevant link is clicked by a user, i.e. the update items link. The details of how the relevant category ID value is passed to the relevant index action method is handled for us behind the scenes by the MVC framework. Note that the MVC framework functionality is contained within relevant .NET base class libraries that are referenced from within code within our project. Let's run the code. So let's create a category. Let's add a category with the title of C# for beginners. So you can see that after we have created our category, we are navigated back to the index view for the category entity, and we are presented with one item in our list of categories. You can see that in addition to the edit, details, and delete links, we have a new link, update items. This is the link that we have just created. So if we click on this link, we are navigated to the index view for our category item entity. But there are currently no category items saved to the system, so our list of category items is of course empty. So in order to test the code we have just created, let's create some dummy data in our category item database table. Due to the referential integrity that we have imposed on our MediaType and category item database table, i.e. note that there's a foreign key field named MediaType ID in the category item database table, we need to add appropriate data to our MediaType database table before we add data to the category item database table. So I've already created the appropriate transact SQL to add data to our MediaType table, as well as our category item table. If you wish to follow along with this part of the tutorial, you are able to download the appropriate SQL scripts from GitHub. I've included a link to the appropriate repository below in the description. So let's run these SQL statements against the MediaType database table. Great. Let's then run these SQL statements against the category item database table to add a few category items related to the C# for beginners category to the category item table. Before you run these SQL statements, note that primary key field values, i.e. values stored in the ID field in your MediaType table and category table, may not match the values within the relevant SQL statements. This is because the primary key values are automatically generated, so please note the following. Please ensure that the category ID foreign key field in the relevant SQL statements that will insert the relevant category item rows match with a primary key value for a row within your category database table. Please also ensure that the MediaType ID foreign key values in the relevant SQL statements that will insert the relevant category item rows into the category item database table match with a primary key value for a row within the MediaType database table. Great, so we have created the rows within our category item database table that relate to the C# for Beginners category in our category database table. So let's run the code. Let's click the link labeled Update Items. Great, so you can see that the category items that have a category ID foreign key set to the ID primary key value for the C# for Beginners category are displayed to us in the category item index view. Excellent. So let's add a breakpoint within the index action method of the category item controller so we can see the process flow in action. So we see here the appropriate category ID argument is passed into the index action method. Then our link query returns the relevant results. And the object containing our results is passed to a method named view, which returns an object of type viewResult. So how does the MVC framework know how to match the action method with the correct view? Behind the scenes, the MVC framework automatically matches the controller's action method with the appropriate view. The action method is named index and by convention is associated with the appropriate view, the index view. How does the MVC framework know in which directory to find the appropriate Razor view? This is because by convention, the category item folder is associated with the controller that is named Category Item Controller. So these conventions enable the MVC framework to handle a lot of detail behind the scenes for us. So the results created in the index action method are passed to the relevant index view. If we look at the index Razor view, at the top of the file there is some declarative code. This is code that strongly types the appropriate view. So the type that this view is expecting for its model is a list of objects of the category item type. The code is looping through the list of items passed into this view by the relevant index action method and producing the relevant HTML code to display a list of category items. So let's create the code to add a category item to the system. So as discussed, the MediaType entity has a one-to-many relationship with the category item entity. We want an administrator to be able to select an appropriate media type from a drop-down list before adding a category item to the system. The requirement states that a content item can be one of two media types, i.e., article or video. For example, a category item's related content may just contain code samples and an explanation of the code. So for such an item, we would select article from the media type drop-down list. If a category item's related content contains a video, then we would select the video item from the media type drop-down list. So in order to create the drop-down list for the media type field in the appropriate create view, we need to add a field to the category items model that will store a collection of media types. So we have already added a public property of type iCollection that is strongly typed with the media type user-defined type to our CategoryItem class. We did this at the beginning of this video. So the Razor technology stores items in a drop-down list as objects of type selectListItem. So let's create an extension method that will be able to convert a list containing objects of any type, for example our MediaType user-defined type, to a list containing objects of type selectListItem. So before we do this, let's create an interface, and you'll see the significance of this interface in a bit. So let's create a folder in the default area named Interfaces. Let's add an interface named iPrimaryProperties. Let's add two members to the iPrimaryProperties interface, a property definition of type integer named ID, and a property definition of type string named title. Then let's go to our MediaType class and make our MediaType class implement the iPrimaryProperties interface. Note that we don't have to change any code for our MediaType class after we have made the MediaType class implement the iPrimaryProperties interface. This is because the MediaType class already contains implementations for all the members of the iPrimaryProperties interface, i.e. an ID property of type integer and a title property of type string. Great, so let's create our extension method. Let's create a folder in the default area named Extensions. Let's add a C# class to the Extensions folder and name this class ConvertExtensions. Let's make this class static. Let's add a public static method to this class and name it ConvertToSelectList. This method is a generic method, so let's add angle brackets after the name of our method. Let's include a tDataType placeholder within the angle brackets. The first parameter of this method must represent the list on which this method will be invoked. So note how the this keyword is included in the first parameter definition. The this keyword included like this in the parameter definition denotes a special parameter used for extension methods. Please view a video series created for this channel on generics, as well as a video series created on link, in order to understand generics and extension methods better. So the second parameter represents which item in our list should be displayed by default to the administrator. So for example, should it be video or should it be article for the MediaType dropdown list? So let's write the code for our extension method. Let's write code to return the result of a link query from this method. The function of this link query is to convert each item within the relevant list to an item of type selectListItem. A drop-down list contains a list containing objects of type selectListItem. The selectListItem type contains three properties: a property named text, a property named value, and a property named selected. The text property is of type string. This property represents the text that is displayed in the relevant drop-down list. So let's assign an appropriate value to the text property. We are assuming that the item object will have a property named title. We want the title property for the item to be displayed within our drop-down list. Okay, so when we add a dot after the item object, why are we not able to see the title property for the item object in the IntelliSense drop-down list? This object could, for example, be of type MediaType. The reason for this is because at the moment, there's no way for the compiler to know that this item object, which is of type T, contains a title property. So we can tell the compiler, as it were, that this item object, which is of type T, implements the iPrimaryProperties interface. This means the compiler will know that the item object implements code for a title property. We can do this by adding an appropriate constraint to our method definition for the ConvertToSelectList extension method. So this is the code we need to add, which represents the appropriate constraint. For more information on constraints, I've included a link to a video on constraints below in the description. Remember, when we created the iPrimary properties interface, we included a definition for the title property of type string. We also included a definition for an ID property, which is of type integer. So now that we have added the appropriate constraint code, when we add a dot after the item object, we can see that the ID property and the title property are presented in the IntelliSense drop-down list. This means the compiler is now aware that the item object implements an appropriate ID property and an appropriate title property. So let's assign the relevant item's title property value. Let's assign the ID value for the relevant item to the value property of the relevant select list item object. This value property will be associated with an item in the drop-down list and will be passed through to the relevant action method when the relevant HTML form is submitted. Let's assign an appropriate value to the selected property. Okay, so this selected property is of type Boolean, so we can assign the results of an appropriate expression to the selected property. So the relevant expression evaluates if the select value argument passed into this method is equal to the relevant item's ID property. This expression will return true if the relevant item's ID property is equal to the selected value argument passed into this method. And conversely, the expression will return false if the relevant item's ID property is not equal to the selected value argument passed into this method. The value property for an object of type select list item is of type string, so we must convert the relevant item's ID, which is of type integer, to a string value. Great! And lastly, let's explicitly convert the value returned from the link query to a list. And we can do this by using the toList conversion method, like this. Great! So next, let's appropriately modify the createAction methods within our CategoryItem controller class. So you see here in the CategoryItem controller class, we have two methods named create. The first create method can be used for calling code that retrieves data from the database. The relevant data can then be passed to the relevant create view. At times, there is no reason to pass any data to the relevant create view. If that is the case for the createAction method here, we could leave this code as it is. In our create view, we do, however, want to display a drop-down list populated with items that represent media types. So to achieve this, we are going to update this action method in a bit. The create view contains an HTML form. The administrator can use this HTML form to add values for relevant form fields and submit the form field values to the relevant createAction method contained within the CategoryItem controller class. The code within the relevant action method can then save the field values to the database. The relevant createAction method that will be called to process the submitted form field values is also named create. So this is our second createAction method. You can see that this createAction method has a HTTP post attribute declared against it. This tells the MVC framework, as it were, that this createAction method is the createAction method used for processing the data submitted to the server from the client. This will be done using what is known as a HTTP post request. So, very simply, the first createAction method retrieves data if necessary and passes the data through to the appropriate view. This is done through what is known as a HTTP GET request. The second createAction method processes the data submitted by the user. The data passed to the second create method is done through what is known as a post request or HTTP post request. So the first createAction method corresponds to the REST verb get, and the second createAction method corresponds to the REST verb post. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. I've added links below in the description under a heading labeled Additional Information for those of you who wish to read more about REST. If you are not familiar with REST, I definitely recommend reading up about REST. So note that the CategoryItem entity's create view is strongly typed with the CategoryItem type. When the create view is first displayed to the administrator, we want the MediaType drop-down list to include all of the MediaType items currently saved to the system. So within this create action method, which is a get action method if you like, let's create a list of items of type MediaType, and let's set this list variable to the results returned from a link query that we can apply to return all the media types stored in the system. So here we are using link and entity framework core to retrieve our MediaType items from the MediaType database table. Notice how the database context object that has been automatically injected into the constructor of this class is integral to our link functionality here. This is how we are able to communicate with our database. Let's create an object of type CategoryItem. Let's set the CategoryID property to a relevant category ID. So how do we get the relevant category ID value? We need to include a parameter within the create action method, like this. Let's set the relevant category ID property to the argument that will be passed into this create action method. Then let's set the MediaType property of the CategoryItem object to the results of our link query. We can now invoke our convert-to-select-list extension method on the list object used for storing our MediaType objects, returned from our link query. This will convert the list of MediaType objects to an appropriate list of objects of type select-list-item. You'll see in a bit how the result of this conversion operation makes it easy to add values to the relevant drop-down list in the appropriate Razor View code. Let's pass in 0 to our extension method because we want the first item in the list to be displayed by default in the relevant drop-down list. Then let's pass in our CategoryItem object to the view method, which will return the relevant view result object to the MVC framework. The MVC framework will then appropriately process the relevant view and return the resulting HTML code to the client's browser. So let's go to our Create Razor View code. Firstly, you can see here that code related to the category ID field was automatically generated for us when we scaffolded the Crud operation-related code for the category item entity. Let's copy this code and paste it at the top of the HTML form, like this. Then let's make this code a hidden input element rather than a select element. We want the category ID to be stored in this field on the front end within the Razor View, but we don't want the user to be able to see and manipulate this value. Let's remove the now redundant category ID related code here. Let's add our drop-down list code for the MediaTypes property. So we can use this HTML select element here to encapsulate code to render our drop-down list to the client. To set the list items for our drop-down list, we can use the ASP-items attribute here and set it to the appropriate model's MediaTypes property. This property stores a list of objects of type select-list-item, which is an appropriate type for the items we want displayed in our drop-down list. So you can see how storing a list of type select-list-item like this makes it easy for a coder to assign the relevant list of drop-down list items to the relevant drop-down list within the relevant Razor View. We created our convert-to-select-list extension method to convert a list of items of any type that implements the iPrimary properties interface to a list of objects of type select-list-item for this purpose. Let's include a default item within our drop-down list using an option element. So by default, we want this text displayed to the administrator within our drop-down list. Great. The last code change we need to make is to the link at the top of the index view for the category item entity labeled Create New. Remember, we are passing in category ID value from this index razor view to the getCreateAction method contained within the category item controller class. Before we modify the create new link anchor element, we need a way to pass the category ID value from the index action method in the category item controller class to the index razor view for the category item entity. We can do this by dynamically setting a property on the ViewBag dynamic object that is provided to us in the MVC framework. ViewBag is a property considered a dynamic object that enables us to share values dynamically between the controller and view within ASP.NET MVC applications. The ViewBag dynamic object provides us with an elegant way to pass values from a controller to a view without needing to include the relevant value within the relevant model. So let's go to the relevant index action method and set a property named category ID on the ViewBag dynamic object to the category ID value passed as an argument to the relevant index action method. So what this means is we'll have access to this category ID value from within the relevant index view through the use of the ViewBag dynamic object. So let's open the relevant index view for the category ID entity and modify the create new link to include a category ID root parameter within the link. So this means that when this link is clicked, the relevant category ID value will be passed into the relevant create action method contained within the category item controller class. I've included a link to relevant content about the ViewBag dynamic object below in the description under the heading labeled Additional Information. Before we test the code, let's remove the category items that we added through SQL Server Management Studio earlier in this tutorial. Okay, let's run the code. Let's add a few category items to the C# for Beginners category. So after we have successfully added a category item to the C# for Beginners category, we are subsequently navigated back to the index view for the category item entity. We should be seeing our new category item displayed to us, but our list is currently empty. Why is this the case at the moment? The reason for this is that although the category item was successfully added to the system, when the code navigates us back to the category item index view, the code is currently not passing a category ID to the category item index view. So we need to include the code for this. So let's add this code to the create action method here. So we are now appropriately passing the category ID to the category item index view. And we can now see our category item displayed to us. Excellent. Excellent! If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing for content like this and much more, and please ring the bell to be notified of future content. Please feel free to share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to help support the channel by making a donation, a PayPal link has been included below in the description. I really enjoy engaging with you in the comment section, so please feel free to share your thoughts with me in the comment section. If you have any questions regarding aspects of the course so far, please leave them below in the comment section and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. The latest code can be found on GitHub. A link to the relevant repository has been included below in the description. Thank you and take care.